NES gets downgraded to a mere AA rating on NES Works 49. After a string of incredible new creations for NES and some wildly inventive adaptations of arcade hits, 1987's newest licensees bring us a 1-2 punch of straight-up arcade conversions. The results are, to put it in games journalism cliches, a mixed bag. SNK's Athena and Taito's Arkanoid are two of the most direct arcade to NES ports we've seen in 1987, and they each go about it with decidedly different degrees of effectiveness. They're also both quite difficult, and as a result they neatly demonstrate the differences between good difficulty and bad difficulty. And finally, they're both notable for shipping in non-standard packaging. Sort of. Let's start by looking at Athena. Athena is another Micronix-developed SNK release for NES. And as you might expect from that description, it's pretty dire. On one hand, the conversion does a pretty good job of transplanting the quirky design of the arcade cabinet onto NES. On the other hand, it's a total mess on a technical level, and its flawed console programming teams up with the oddball game design of the arcade title to render Athena borderline unplayable. Mechanics that seem merely strange in the coin-op release become absolutely opaque here. It's kind of hard to believe the girl who stars in this steaming heap of a game would go on to become a pillar of SNK's business. Technically, this Athena is not the same character as Athena Asamiya, although you wouldn't know it from the actual games. Athena Asamiya is a psychic schoolgirl who has had a varied career through the years, ranging from a warrior goddess to pop idol, and this has mostly been expressed through the King of Fighters franchise. This Athena is a goddess, but since she starts off the game in a schoolgirl uniform and looks more or less identical to her human counterpart in the semi-sequel Psycho Soldier, you'd be forgiven for assuming they're the same character. In any case, the game Athena plays as a side-scrolling platformer in the Ghosts and Goblins vein. There's a small element of, well, it's not quite exploration exactly, since the game uses Super Mario Bros. Style ratchet scrolling that prevents backtracking, but the world here contains multiple pathways. If you drop into a pit, you don't die, but rather fall onto an alternate path. Your goal is to march left or right through 8 worlds, destroying enemies while avoiding death. This is more easily said than done. Athena is a divine warrior who can wield a variety of weapons and equip different elements of armor, but this adventure lacks even a morsel of forgiveness. When Athena touches a foe, she takes damage, but there's no knockback effect and no mercy invincibility. Compare her reaction to taking damage to, say, the way Simon Belmont was thrown a space backwards when struck by an enemy, or the way Pit shrieked and flashed invincibly for several seconds. When a monster collides with Athena, there's nothing to keep them apart long enough to allow players to reorient themselves. As a result, even the weakest monster can take down Athena almost instantly as the game registers a rapid succession of collisions and saps her life meter in the space of a second or two. This is only the beginning of the frustrations on tap in Athena, though. Oh, it's such a mess of a game. Part of the problem is that SNK and Micronix were both punching above their weight class here, and losing. Athena was one of the early works to lead the charge toward the integration of RPG mechanics into action games, but it's a very tentative and halting step along that path. Athena powers up as she goes along her way, but her upgrades lack the sort of permanence we've seen for characters like Link, or Pit, or the Warrior of Argus. Rather than following a clear and persistent skill path where she becomes progressively stronger, Athena instead gains strength through random drops she collects from defeated enemies, or by smashing into pieces of scenery. I think there are some interesting ambitions at work here. Athena can collect passive power-ups along with weapons and armor. She begins the game wearing a bikini and sandals, which is kind of borderline cheesecake in official art, but doesn't seem particularly salacious within the game itself. Instead, it helps create a visible contrast as you collect equipment. Athena goes from being lightly clad to decked out in full combat gear as she acquires helmets, shields, and armor. Not that possessing armor necessarily makes her more durable. Bad guys can still shred your heroine in a split second if you're not careful, even when she's clad in head-to-toe metal. On top of that, gear in Athena tends to be rather temporary. You can lose your equipment pretty easily thanks to the frequent appearance of power-down icons that can instantly reduce you from kitted out to stripped down, effectively returning Athena to her default state, a particularly devastating turn of events if it happens toward the end of a stage. Meanwhile, her weapon upgrades aren't really any more reliable. There are something like a dozen different weapons that appear when you defeat enemies, and these don't follow the linear upgrade path you might expect after some of the other recent games to have appeared on NES. Instead, there are different classes of weapons, with a few different variants appearing within each class. This is, again, kind of impressive in terms of design ambition, making the game more RPG-like, but it also leads to frequent frustration. For example, swords are decent combat weapons, but the most basic sword can't break through environmental barriers. Clubs are less powerful in combat than swords, but they can smash rocks more easily. Arrows have great range, but they're weak, and more esoteric weapons, like the flail, can hit distant enemies hard, but they tend to leave Athena vulnerable. Enemies drop weapons pretty frequently, and these pickups can be tough to avoid. As with the armor downgrades, stumbling into the wrong weapon at the wrong time is easy to do and makes a difficult game even harder. If you play it right, you can upgrade Athena to an ultimate version with a huge flaming sword, but even then the game doesn't get any easier. As a result of the janky physics and unpredictable flow of the action, Athena is the kind of game that transcends punishing and becomes nearly impossible to beat through fair play. It's the kind of game that's difficult to beat even with cheats. I can barely make it to stage 2 with normal play thanks to the relentless, debilitating damage physics, but even with a Game Genie code for invincibility, I can't get past stage 3. For some reason, the invincibility code causes Athena to die to a single enemy attack once she transforms into a mermaid. Going by anecdotal evidence, this isn't just me being a pathetic and unskilled gamer. Everyone responds to any mention of Athena by lamenting its difficulty or mentioning how they've only ever finished the game by abusing emulator states. It's a brutally difficult game, but not in a way that makes any victory feel earned, just exhausting. Really, about the best thing Athena has going for it is its Japanese release, which came in a huge, eye-catching oversized box in a searing shade of bright pink. And why was it so large, you may wonder? Because there was a music cassette inside containing a full vocal rendition of the famous vocal theme to the game's semi-sequel, Psycho Soldier. Meanwhile, the American version shipped in a gorgeous Art Deco-inspired box that looks frankly far more classy than this mess deserves. As for the C64 version, well, even Athena didn't deserve that. Then on the other hand, we have Taito's Arkanoid. Arkanoid is a very difficult arcade conversion that also shipped in an oversized box. And like Athena, Arkanoid takes a well-defined genre and tarts it up with new play mechanics. But where Athena was a case of this being done all wrong, Arkanoid is far more defensible. At heart, Arkanoid is an update of a decade-old genre, the Breakout clone. Think Alleyway basically, but better. Players control a paddle moving back and forth along the bottom of the screen, deflecting a ball that shatters bricks while trying to prevent said ball from falling into the gutter along the bottom of the screen. This was a well-worn concept in gaming by 1987. So well-worn, in fact, that it was easy to take for granted. But Arkanoid does a lot to change up the Breakout formula. For starters, it plays around with the overall concept of the brick fields at the top of the screen. Rather than simply presenting players with even rows of colored bricks to shatter, Arkanoid treats them like giant pixels, creating elaborate illustrations with the bricks. This becomes quite clear early on when you're presented with a field of blocks that neatly resembles one of the aliens from Taito hit Space Invaders. The decorative fields give every stage a different feel from the last. Some can be hilariously easy to complete, while others can be crushingly tough. Basic rules of Breakout apply. The paddle, here called the Vaus, causes the ball to reflect at different angles depending on where it makes contact. The further away from the center of the Vaus the ball hits, the sharper the angle at which it bounces away. As in the olden days, the name of the game is to avoid missing ball for high score. But here the actual design is far more complex than that. In addition to featuring more varied brick fields than classic Breakout games, Arkanoid also throws in additional play elements. The most significant of these are the capsules that appear somewhat randomly when you break bricks. The capsules come in several different colors, and each one confers different bonuses. For example, there's the capsule that causes the ball to split into 3, tripling your brick breaking capacity and allowing you 2 free misses. Another capsule slows the ball speed to a crawl. Another allows you to catch the ball, releasing it at will, and there's a dark blue capsule that doubles the width of the Vaus. There's even a red capsule that allows you to fire lasers up the screen, blasting through blocks and enemies alike without a need for hitting them with the ball. Yes, that's right, enemies. Little creatures crawl onto the field as you play, moving around chaotically. These critters can't hurt the Vaus directly, they'll explode if they make contact with the paddle, but they certainly can be a nuisance. When the ball strikes a foe, it'll bounce off as if hitting a block or the paddle. This adds an element of unpredictability to the action, as it can be difficult to predict when a monster will crawl into the path of the ball and what angle the ball will carry him away from it. This makes a tough game even harder, but not necessarily in a bad way. Arkanoid demands skill and precision, but unlike Athena, the taxing difficulty here feels fair and reasonable. The ball in Arkanoid moves quickly and accelerates the longer it remains in play, but the animation, control, and physics of this NES conversion do absolute justice to the arcade original. A big part of what makes Arkanoid so good relates to its oversized packaging. While you can play the game with a standard D-pad, it's far more effective and fun to make use of the packed-in VOUS controller. Yes, Arkanoid shipped with another peripheral for NES. This one is more practical, if rather less versatile than the PowerPad. It's a small dial-based paddle controller. The VOUS controller is interesting because it's not a free dial analog controller. Rather than working like, say, the spinner on Tempest, the VOUS dial actually has a limited range of movement, and the degree to which it's been turned corresponds to the placement of the on-screen VOUS. If you turn the dial to its limits in either direction, the on-screen paddle will leap immediately to the corresponding edge of the screen. This takes a little getting used to, but once you get a handle on the relationship between dial rotation and on-screen movement, you can position the VOUS exactly where you want it to be in a split second. By contrast, using the D-pad feels ungainly and slow. The VOUS responds to the D-pad, yes, but you'll often find that it simply moves too slowly to catch the ball, no matter how quick your reactions. Certain plays are literally impossible without the VOUS peripheral. Even with the paddle, Arkanoid is not an easy game. The relentless speed of the action and lack of a pause button require a level of attentiveness that can be pretty exhausting. But again, this is arcade difficulty done right, unlike Athena's. Arkanoid demands much of the player, but it also arms the player with the tools they need to succeed, literally. It gives you everything you need except raw skill. Arkanoid contains nearly 3 dozen levels, including a final showdown with a Moai-looking enemy leader named Do. But not unlike Athena, it's pretty tough to get past the third stage of this game. The difference between Arkanoid and Athena, of course, is that when you die a few seconds into level 3 in Arkanoid, you'll cheerfully start over and give it another go. It's a hard game, but a fun one. Next time on NES Works, double the pleasure, double the Bruderbund.
こんにちは。アテナのファミコンカセットを買ってくれてどうもありがとう。ビクトリー国の王女として幻想界へ旅立ってワクワクドキドキの大冒険を続けたアテナ。君はどこまでアテナと一緒に旅ができたかな？ところで君はサイコソルジャーというゲームを体験してくれたかな？知らないっていう君はぜひ挑戦してみてね。なんとこのゲームでは世界がシグマと呼ばれる怪物どもによって侵略されて破壊されてしまうの。元の平和な世界を取り戻すためにアテナが超能力を持った戦士朝宮アテナとして再び登場します。それに今度はとっても頼もしい助っ人がいるの。彼の名前はシーケース。中国憲法の達人で彼もアテナと同じ超能力の持ち主で2人で力を合わせてシグマに戦いを挑んでいくわけ。このゲームをすでに体験した人は知ってると思うけどアテナの歌が流れているの。それでは体験した人もしてない人もこのアテナとはまた一味違うサイコソルジャーの歌と BGM の世界を味わってください。サイコソルジャー